Hello, welcome. This is Addressing the COVID-19 Crisis, an open forum webinar for pharmacists. I'm Michael Hogue, Dean of the Loma Linda University School of Pharmacy, President of the American Pharmacists Association. It is good to be with you again this week. And this week we have some more excitement happening with COVID vaccines. It seems like we've talked about COVID vaccines a good bit here in the last couple months. Today we're going to really focus in on the Johnson & Johnson single-dose COVID-19 vaccines effectiveness and safety. The FDA committee is meeting tomorrow to discuss and vote on this, and we have the data, and you're going to be among the first to be able to really look at this and analyze it. Of course, we wanted to bring on our resident expert, our own Colonel John Grabenstein, who is a pharmacoepidemiologist. He's the editor, serves as an editor for the Immunization Action Coalition at immunize.org and is the president of Vaccine Dynamics. John has been a regular on our program, especially when we're talking about COVID vaccines. We also have Mitch Rotholtz, APHA's Chief of Governance and State Affiliates, and also Executive Director of the APHA Foundation. As many of you know, Mitch is a critical liaison for the profession of pharmacy and the agencies that work with vaccines, as well as a lot of national and local coalitions around vaccination efforts. And we have our clinical expert, Dan Zlot, who's Senior Vice President of Education and Business Development. Dan has tremendous knowledge in immunology and viral activity. He's worked at the NIH for about 10 years prior to coming to APHA and really has a wealth of knowledge. And so if you have clinical questions about COVID-19, any of the therapies that you might have questions about, we'll take those as well. Again, we really want to hear from you and hear what your needs are. So we'll get to that in just a moment. We're also pleased to be joined by Mike Baxter, Senior Director of Regulatory Policy with APHA. He'll share with us a couple of regulatory updates as we get toward the end of our program today. And of course, if you have any regulatory questions, we'll call on Mike to answer those as our subject matter expert. Now, just to orient everybody, if you've not been with us, what we normally do is interview our guests and some structured interview questions, and then we will turn to you, our audience, for some questions and try to get to as many of those as we can. If you look at the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll notice that there's a handouts tab. That handouts tab is where you will find the slides that we're using today. All of the handout has active links that will actually take you directly to the resource that we're referencing, and you'll find that to be very valuable. You can download it now onto your computer, or if you want to access it later, you just go to pharmacists.com in the COVID-19 resources page, and you'll find all of our handouts from every week of the show, as well as you'll be able to hear a recording of this one if you have friends who weren't able to join us today and you want to have them listen to the details about the Janssen J&J product. They'll be able to do that by downloading the program. We intend to have today's program posted sometime tomorrow. So it'll be easily available to you. There is a questions tab, as you can see in the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'm happy to see that we already have a number of questions that are being submitted. So some of you come every week and we're ready for this, and you've got questions on your mind. Go ahead and enter them into the questions tab now. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Some of them we'll answer in our Q&A at the beginning. Some of them we'll pull in a little later on in the program. And so we'll make sure we get to just as many of your questions as we possibly can. Now, I think I mentioned to you today's webinar is being recorded. I want to just reemphasize that today. We will record today's webinar and post it. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask John and Mitch and Dan to join me on screen, and we're going to jump into today's conversation. John, it's an exciting time for a person who loves vaccines and believes in vaccinology. I mean, we've had a lot of things going on. This has got to be a pretty exciting time from your perspective.
Well, just think about all that we've accomplished since the middle of December. And I said we, but that's not me. I haven't given any vaccinations. All of the folks listening in, the pharmacists across America, who've been sticking the needles in arms, getting the programs organized administratively, making it happen, reassuring the public. Think back about all we've accomplished in 2.5 months. It's incredible.
It is. It really is.
Can I suggest we go to the next slide? I think it's the right one. This is when you go home from work today, if you oh, you know what I mean. Tell your family the New York Times says pharmacists are really valuable. Take a look at this. This is front page New York Times today. Nursing homes, once hotspots, outpace US in declines, and that's what you're looking at is two curves of death rates. It's a percent. It's a relative number compared to that when vaccination rollout begins. But you can see that the total US COVID deaths rose, but the deaths among nursing home residents fell. So all of those of you listening who are involved in any way with nursing home vaccinations against COVID-19, you saved lives. This is victory.
Wow.
This is what success looks like.
Isn't that amazing? And I mean, really, you know, let's give credit where credit's due. This really is on the backs of pharmacy, the profession, because pharmacists across the country have largely been doing the immunizations in nursing homes, long-term care facilities. This is an exciting win. It's an exciting win for patients, but it's an exciting win for pharmacists. So I'm really excited about it. Now let's jump into this new vaccine. John, you are so great with creating comparative tables so we can look at things side by side. You've created some tables for us here. Let's walk through some of these aspects about the 3 now COVID vaccines that we are anticipating being available within the next week. So Janssen's probably going to get approved. It sounds like it's on that track. So give us this a little bit about some of the overview of the product itself. We'll get into some of the clinical information, I think, on the next couple slides.
Yeah, so let me just start with the BioNTech, Pfizer, and the Moderna columns. Many of you are pretty familiar with that now. What we used to call a 5-dose vial for Pfizer is a 6-dose vial now. You may have seen in the paper that Pfizer and BioNTech and FDA are talking about relief from the dry ice level of freezing. Not yet, but stay tuned. In the Moderna column, Moderna is applying to FDA to take the same vial and add more stuff in the Oreo cookie sense, more vaccine to that same glass container. And so someday you may get vials that are labeled 15 dose rather than 10. Not approved yet, but that's on the horizon. But the big news is we are probably, I'm predicting just a few days away from a third vaccine becoming available. It is from Janssen Vaccines, and that is the pharmaceutical division of Johnson & Johnson. We believe FDA is going to be labeling it the Janssen COVID-19 vaccines, parallel to the way the other two are described. If you think I'm being snooty and sophisticated and whatever for pronouncing it Janssen, that's Paul Janssen was a Belgian physician who created a pharmaceutical company in 1955. Johnson & Johnson absorbed it some years ago, and so that's the way it's pronounced. Now, if you're from parts of America where French fries are called freedom fries, you may need to blend in and just call it Janssen, but the right pronunciation is Janssen. Yeah. Okay, but this is a different kind of vaccine. It's an adenovirus vectored vaccine. It's not an mRNA vaccine. That means it's a virus. It's it's an almost live virus. It's replication incompetent. It will go into the cells, act once, but not replicate like measles vaccine would or yellow fever vaccine would. So it's a little different. What FDA is going to say about whether it can be used in immunocompromised people or not, which is where we usually worry about live virus vaccines, remains to be seen. It is grown in Per-C6 cells. They are human embryo origin cells. You see the dose. It's intramuscular. It's a single dose. It's a single dose. Did I say it's a single dose? That's a big deal, obviously, from a throughput perspective and a variety of other perspectives. It's a suspension, shake it gently. 5-dose vial, we think we really mean 5-dose vial this time. No preservative, so the same, infection control discarded at the end of the shift kinds of, or within a few hours, kinds of issues apply. And there's the storage. So, and it's a refrigerated product. So much simpler probably to handle, and certain time limits are to be observed.
So, John, let me go back up to the adenovirus vector for just a minute. Knowing a lot of the vaccine hesitancy issues we dealt with the mRNA vaccines, I know the question will come up. Pharmacists will get this question. Does since the adenovirus vector does go into the cell, is there a concern about DNA replacement in the human DNA? Is there a problem or a concern that there could be DNA replacement?
No, well, there is no concern. One should not be concerned. The virus introduces, a little bit of genetic material that, like the mRNAs, causes the body to make some proteins, to make the spike protein that is the protective thing that the body responds to. But it's the same mechanism that measles virus gets in your cells and does things. Yellow fever vaccine gets in your cells and does things. This is closer to what we're used to seeing, but with some, because it's deficient in replication, it can't, gallop away and cause a runaway infection. Like, theoretically, yellow fever could.
Doesn't have the ability to replicate. It's missing the transcriptase that's necessary for replication. And that's, I think, the key thing is it's not going to transcribe your DNA because there's no transcriptase there in a non-replicating adenovirus. And I think that's really important for you all to understand. So kind of to go back, people are asking, well, is this considered a live vaccine or is it considered an inactivated vaccine? So what say ye about that if you were to just try to classify it?
Yeah, I think the definitive thing when we see the EUA sheet and whether the FDA makes immunocompromise a contraindication or not. Technically, it's live-ish, but it doesn't replicate. So anyway.
So the jury's out on exactly how that's going to be perceived by the FDA. We'll listen closely to their hearing and we'll see what exactly they say. That's very important. Let's also move on then to the next slide. I think we'll go on to the next. Just mentioning on the previous slide, don't go back on the slide, Meg, but just to mention to the audience, do pay close attention to the storage parameters. It's a little bit complex because it depends on if the vial's punctured or unpunctured, and there's different stability that's been achieved there, and it's a little bit of a moving target because the more data we get about storage and handling, as you can see with the Pfizer product, we see the manufacturers requesting changes. So just paying attention to that. Okay, so tell us about efficacy. What do we know about efficacy with Janssen?
The next slide will be safety. So just if you're wondering about safety, we'll get to that in the next one. Let's talk about efficacy. So this is a single dose product, 43,000 participants. It ran longer than the other studies, so there actually were more COVID-19 cases than the other two products accumulated. The number you're seeing in the news is it's 67% effective. And that's true. That includes any moderate, severe, or critical case of disease. I'm going to put an asterisk on that to hold that thought for a moment because you'll see something coming in a couple of cells. The efficacy stratified by age is actually a little better in 60 plus than in 18 to 59. They started enrolling 60 pluses a little later than the others, so there wasn't quite the confidence interval is just a little bit wider, but you can see that the 76 is more than 67, 64, but good efficacy for both of those. Now you're already starting to hear it in the popular press. Yeah, but it's not in the 90s. Well, let's talk. So that 66.9% is any severity of disease, including the moderate cases, which was 2 symptoms. If you had 2 symptoms, you are called a moderate case, and that's in the 66.9% value. But if you restrict it just to severe disease, which is systemic illness or hospitalization or death, it was 85% effective. And I put that in bold. That's my editorializing. You know, I spent Wednesday morning reading a 62-page FDA summary of the information Janssen submitted, and I think of all the numbers in the 62 pages, 85% is the single most relevant number to explain the value of this product. We should also say that this the data that this study came from was from the widest geographically so far, and also with the more transmissible, more virulent variants in South Africa and in the UK. And this study included an assessment of whether people got asymptomatic infection, and it was complicated. It was preliminary, but it looks like the best data yet on preventing asymptomatic infection, which is assumed to be a surrogate for stopping transmission.
And John, I would also just mention that in addition to being more geographically diverse, the population in the study was actually more ethnically diverse and as well, with a large number of Hispanic and Latinx persons in the study. It's really the first study that's had actually more Latino population individuals enrolled in the study than proportionally the U.S. population has. And so that was an interesting thing as well when you really get into the data.
So I'm going to jump to a question that somebody's already submitted, which is, should I wait for the mRNAs? Is it okay to get this vaccine? What do I tell my patients? I'm going to give you 6 reasons why the Janssen vaccine is just fine, and there's no reason to wait for anything better. 85% is a great number. It was, and it was tested against, in a greater set of variant circulation than the other 2 were studied on. You'll like the safety profile I'm going to show you on the next slide. You get protection sooner. That 84% starts 14 days after the first dose, not 14 days after the second dose. So you get protection sooner. It is more convenient. The confidence interval is narrower because of the large size, and this is the best data yet on preventing asymptomatic infection.
Yeah, and John, let's go back and cover one other thing that actually was on your previous slide, but we're now getting several questions about this. And that is the use of embryonic stem cells in the production of the vaccine. I know the Catholic Church has positions on the use of human embryos in the creation of vaccines and so forth. Could you just comment on the Janssen vaccine and where that nuance is at, so that those who are concerned will be aware?
Right. So those Per-C6 cells were derived from a human embryo intensely aborted in the 1980s. And so if you consider abortion to stop a beating heart, as many people do, that's not good. And it obviously, the child was not aborted for this to retrieve the cells. That was secondary. But the Catholic Church and others would say you shouldn't favor a product that had any implications with an abortion. You should prefer something else. Well, it's fine to prefer something, but the Catholic Church has said it's okay to get that vaccine, that Janssen. I mean, they didn't name Janssen, but vaccines grown in those cells because of how severe COVID-19 is, and preserving your own life and the lives of your children and your parents and that sort of thing is actually outweighs. You should complain about the source of the vaccine, but you should get the vaccine.
Okay, so that's good to know, and I hope that answers everybody's questions who asked questions about that. If you have further questions, please type them in the chat box. We'll try to get to those as we can. John, let's talk about safety now. If you don't mind, we'll go on to the next slide.
Yep. So the common injection site side effects are pretty much this, the same type. The numbers are a little slower, a little lower than the other two columns. And every FDA alumnus out there is jumping up to say, don't compare safety across studies because it's not fair, and they're right. But I'm going to do it anyway. The grade 3 events were somewhat, certainly less frequent than Moderna, and somewhat less frequent than in the BioNTech Pfizer study. I think within 2 weeks or a month, urban legends will say whether or not this is less reactogenic or comparable. And so we'll know that pretty quick. I mean, numerically, the numbers are a little lower. Whether that's completely reliable at this stage remains to be seen. Serious adverse events, FDA didn't see anything worrisome. The deaths were fine. There were remember we talked with the mRNAs back in December about Bell's palsy. 2 cases in each the vaccine group and the control group, so no imbalance with Janssen's vaccine.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Dan Zlot to join us real quick. I mean, Dan's expertise is also in immunology, and he is very aware of some of the concerns that we have in immunocompromised patients. And again, the adenovirus vector is technically, bringing in the antigen here, the antigen component, but it's non-replicating. What are the concerns potentially in immunocompromised patients? What would we be concerned about, and what is it the FDA is going to try to nuance here in their decision making? Can you help us with that?
Yeah, I think the concerns are relatively minor, but there's a small possibility that what could happen in an immunocompromised person is that you get some type of an infection, and by infection I mean the actual vaccine itself, that is flagging the cells that are actually infected by the vaccine and causing an unusual reaction. It's really almost theoretical because that same thing could happen to healthy people and we're not seeing that. So the only time that would occur is if you had an unusual immune deficiency that caused a very unusual type of immune response against a cell that had been flagged essentially by your immune system in an incomplete way. Like I said, it's so theoretical that it's basically a non-existent type of a concern.
Yeah, okay. So again, this is why we have to pay attention to the FDA guidance. We got a lot of very smart scientists who are evaluating these things and making recommendations from the FDA, and then of course the CDC is doing the same. So let's pay close attention to that. And I do want to go ahead and talk about Bell's palsy because it seems like that's been we talked about that with the Pfizer vaccine, we talked about it with the Moderna vaccine. Let's go ahead and address it here with the Janssen vaccine as well.
So it looks like no elevated risk, and I should say when the CDC has done its safety reviews now with millions of people vaccinated with the mRNA vaccines, they found no elevations in the Bell's palsy rate. I should say that Monday, so the ACIP will have a meeting. Well, so can we do the schedule? Tomorrow, the FDA Advisory Committee, the VRBPAC, meets to give FDA advice on whether to grant the EUA or not. My prediction is they will grant it and authorize it. And so FDA could act Saturday or Sunday, and the ACIP will meet Sunday and Monday. Sunday would be the vote if the FDA authorizes the EUA on whether to accept the Janssen vaccine for widespread or narrow use in the US. I would expect widespread. And then Monday, you're welcome to watch on the internet. There'll be the most recent safety update. And also, if I can give a shameless plug for immunize.org, the CDC folks are going to come on immunize.org on the 4th and give a live update on vaccine safety again.
That's great. Yeah, and that update on Monday is one you're not going to want to miss. It's a good safety update. I really encourage pharmacists to listen in on that. And again, you can go to cdc.gov. Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices webpage. The agenda is posted there. You don't have to pre-register since there's no travel to Atlanta for this one. You can just go right on and listen to it. We'd encourage pharmacists to do that. Very important. And of course, we here at APHA will summarize it and give you a briefing on it as well in our publications. We provide quite a number and have quite a number issue briefs available on the pharmacist.com website, and we'll have those available as soon as we have recommendations out of FDA and ACIP on this vaccine as well. John, we're getting a lot of questions about other vaccines that might be coming down the pipeline. Just very briefly, could you comment on how the Novavax product is similar or different, and how the AstraZeneca product is similar or different to the Janssen product, just to give us a little bit of a preview?
From a mechanism standpoint, the Janssen vaccine and AstraZeneca's are both adenoviruses. Janssen uses an uncommon human adenovirus. AstraZeneca uses a chimpanzee virus. AstraZeneca is a 2-dose. It had some sort of muddy clinical trials overseas. There's a U.S.-centric trial that's could report pretty, within the next few weeks. So I'm looking for that. Novavax released its interim data a day before Janssen did, and had pretty similar numbers. Both of those, and I forgot to mention hospitalizations with Janssen. Both of those products were very effective at preventing hospitalization, almost complete prevention, and complete if you waited 28 days after vaccination. So, and Novavax, on a mechanism perspective, is an inactivated vaccine. It's isolated. It is actually injecting the spike protein directly. There's no viruses as intermediates or mRNAs as intermediates.
Okay, great. And just to be clear, John, the adenovirus vector is actually coding for the mRNA of the spike protein. Is that correct? I think that's the right way to say it.
That's right. The virus conveys the blueprint,
Yes.
and the virus, as viruses do, engage the human cells to go do some things, make a protein in this case, and that protein to be made is spike.
Dan, you got some more to add to that?
Yeah, just one quick clarification. Adenoviruses are double-stranded DNA viruses, so they actually do inject DNA into the cell. That DNA does get into the nucleus of the cell, and then it gets translated back out to mRNA. But maybe a little bit of a technical detail. There are some concerns people have about the fact that this is a DNA-based platform and the DNA is getting into the nucleus. And I think one important thing to understand about the way that different types of viruses work, some viruses are able to actually inject their DNA into the human chromosome or into the human genome, and then it kind of lives there for a while. HIV does that, for example. And there's some other viruses that do that. Adenoviruses as a whole do not. So their DNA is not incorporated into the genome. And so that really minimizes some of the concerns or some of the risks that people are worried about when you start hearing about DNA and risk for mutations, cancers down the road, et cetera. So adenoviruses are a very safe vaccine platform from that standpoint.
Now, let's talk about a broader topic again, and Dan, don't go away. Let's talk about a broader topic here, and that's about fertility concerns. We continue to hear this about concerns with vaccines and fertility, that patients are just not sure, we don't have enough data. Give us the argument that we can use with our patients as to why they don't need to be concerned about the vaccine causing problems with fertility. Dan, you want to start with that, and then John, you can chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so John can correct anything I say wrong. So so I would say here's one of the biggest reasons why this wouldn't be a huge concern for me. Adenoviruses are extremely common. We encounter them all the time, and we're constantly mounting immune responses against adenoviruses. And so the idea that this vaccine is going to cause any more issue than all the adenoviruses that are floating around out there in the environment is probably not a significant concern. And so hopefully that might be something you could raise with patients. And in terms of
true, and I'll just extend it. The rumor mill goes beyond adenoviruses. It goes that any COVID vaccine could do this. And some guy had some theory, but there was no evidence behind it, and there continues to be no evidence behind it. And in fact, there's evidence against it from some other laboratory studies. It's alarming. It gets women in their 20s, 30s, 40s attention, but it has no basis in fact. And in contrast, we know that the natural infection can do harm to a woman and her baby. And the American College of OBGYNs says, offer the woman vaccine.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I was just going to add as well, John, I think that last point is really important. That's a key takeaway. The other thing I would add it to the concern about mRNA vaccines. Our bodies are full of mRNA anyway, so there's no additional risk there from an mRNA standpoint. And in terms of the immune reaction or the potent response that people get from the vaccine sometimes, especially that second dose of the mRNA-based vaccines that we're seeing, that's not all that unlike actually a flu type response in terms of from an immunologic standpoint. And again, pregnant women also get the flu and it does not seem to affect the child. So a couple different tools you can use to help educate patients.
I also want to point out that the update,
flu virus can hurt a woman. So.
Right. Just want to also remind everybody that update that John mentioned earlier that the CDC is going to do on Monday for the ACIP, the vaccine safety update, will contain detailed information about safety in pregnancy as one of the components that they'll be talking about. So very important opportunity to tune in there, I think, and get more information if you're concerned about that. So that's great. John, on the Moderna and Pfizer products, do these products have full FDA approval at this point? Are we still in an EUA situation?
We're still in an EUA situation. Presumably, some office in FDA continues to review the total packet, so they're working their way towards full licensure, but it has not been granted yet. So, presuming that FDA grants the EUA on Saturday, we would have 3 EUA vaccines.
Dan, we're going to have you back one more time for one more question here. I've had both doses of my vaccine, and thankfully, in my case, I only had a sore arm, and the second dose I needed to take a nap, but I always was just looking for an excuse to take a nap. So it actually worked out great for me. I took a nap. But the question has arisen about concerns with NSAIDs following vaccination, and should you use acetaminophen or paracetamol if you're listening to this program from Europe, or should you use an NSAID like ibuprofen over the counter to deal with your pain?
Great question. So the answer is that it's okay to take NSAIDs or acetaminophen after you receive your vaccine and if you have symptoms. It's advised for now not to prophylactically take ibuprofen or Tylenol or acetaminophen prior to your vaccine. So there's some theoretical data out there that suggests that if you take one of those anti-inflammatories prior to receiving a vaccine, you may have lower antibody levels than you would have if you didn't pre-medicate. It's somewhat theoretical, and there's still far more data needed to conclusively say one way or the other whether it's safe to do or not. But since we want to err on the side of caution and ensure that we mount a proper immune response, that's where that CDC recommendation is coming from.
That's right. So we don't recommend pre-medication. I will mention, for those of you who dig really deep into the studies and look at the details, the Moderna study actually did have an arm of people who received paracetamol as a part of the protocol, and so there were people who did have pre-medication with paracetamol, but again, it was an insignificant amount of data overall to be able to make a recommendation for that. So in case you see that, just so that you're all aware. Now let's see here. I'm gonna ask Mitch Rotholz to come on. I've got a very practical question, Mitch, for you. I would love to know about whether or not pharmacists will actually get paid for giving the Anacin vaccine. We We know pharmacists can get paid for giving the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine. Tell us a little bit about the differences in payment.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So the guidance that was issued at the end of October in regards to payment from the Trump administration and CMS talked about both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, also mentioned about vaccines that had single doses. For single dose vaccines, the administration rate, the Medicare guided rate, is $28.39. That could also be adjusted to geographic rates. So coming out when they established the process for billing for and paying vaccines, if you recall, they identified codes for the first and second doses, and then for those vaccines that are a single dose, they identified a rate for that as well. So they've already set it up. The rate is $28.39, adjusted by geographic rate, and that's a guide for Medicare is a guide for other Medicaid programs and Medicaid programs in private sectors.
Yeah, and I just point out to our listeners and viewers that we do have a resource available at pharmacists.com in the coronavirus section on payment that gives you lots of details, tips, and making sure that you're documenting correctly to get that payment and the processes for that. So use that resource. Now, Mitch, you and I both have been a part of some mass vaccination efforts in recent weeks, and we're getting pretty good at learning how to get the maximum amount of liquid out of those vials. I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about how to squeeze every dose out of a vial of Pfizer or Moderna and maximize those doses. You want to comment a little bit about that, and also anything you've heard about the doses and getting doses from the Janssen vaccine vial?
Okay, so let's start with the Janssen vaccine first. The documentation that's been submitted to EUA says 5 doses per vial. That's it at this point. We don't know anything beyond the 5 that has been submitted for the EUA. And just like happened with the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, that was what they started out with. 5 doses for Pfizer, 10 doses for Moderna, and then through experience, things started getting modified. So Janssen coming out 5 doses. In terms of the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, recently FDA under the EUA changed the number of doses per vial to 6 doses. Now, in some cases with really good technique and processes, you can get 7 doses. That's not what is approved under the EUA. There's a debate going on in some of the states in terms of how many providers should be able to get out and be use. Again, we're trying to optimize what we've got. It depends on which syringes you use. And in the ancillary kits, you've got different types of syringes that will give you different types of number of doses. And we've got a piece on understanding dead space. I recommend people look at that to understand really what that means. So depending upon which syringes you use, if you use ones that are not the low dead zone syringes, and especially those that are produced out of China, CDC's recommendation is that you mix the type of syringes and needles that you use. For example, if you can draw out 6 doses, use 3 of, for example, the vanishing jet Vex syringes, and then use 3 of the Chinese or other syringes just to maximize your chances of getting 6 doses out of a vial. It takes technique, and just go slow. That's the thing. Go slow. And again, on the mRNA vaccines, you do not flick to get the bubbles out.
That's right. Yeah, so we don't want pharmacists to be flickers on this one. We want our pharmacists to gently draw the dose out of the vaccine, trying not to create turbulence with the mRNAs because they're so fragile, and we shouldn't be tapping because that could in fact not be good for the vaccine. So John, I want to ask you a question about other vaccines. Adenovirus technology is not really new. We've known about it before. Can you give us some examples where adenovirus vaccine technology has been used before this? I think that might be reassuring for pharmacists and also might help us deal with some hesitancy issues.
So every Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard trainee has gotten adenovirus vaccines since the 1980s. They're actually vaccine tablets that you swallow. They're enteric coated. Because adenovirus type 4 and adenovirus type 7 are so common in newly mixed dense populations like a military trainee barrack. But this new technology of a recombinant adenovirus that carries a gene product to trigger protein production it's been tested for 10 years. Not a lot of licensed products. It's used in an Ebola vaccine from Johnson & Johnson, from Janssen, that it's licensed in Europe, just not licensed in the US yet.
Yeah. I'm also going to address a question that we got about what do we think about the news that a single dose of mRNA vaccine is 91% effective after a single dose, and some in European countries have used single dose strategies, delaying that second dose for some period of time. The issue with this really has to do with the presence of a sufficient number of neutralizing antibodies over time so that B cell differentiation can occur. And the concern we have is that, with these variants that circulate, we need to have a sustained high number of neutralizing antibodies in order to have good B cell maturation and differentiation over time. A single dose tends to provide a peak, a nice peak, but then a drop off typically. And the second dose is actually what gets us up to these high levels of neutralizing antibodies. And if you go back and look at the original studies that were done with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, you'll see on a curve a really remarkable increase in neutralizing antibodies with that second dose. It's because of that elevation of neutralizing antibodies and our desire to try to give us as much protection against variants until we understand those variants a little better, that I think we've been a little more conservative here in the US in recommendations. And we got to remember, the FDA's approved these as 2-dose vaccines with a specific interval. And so I think that's where we're at right now. And I appreciate the question. I wonder if John has anything you'd like to add to that.
Agree with everything you said. One mRNA dose gives you a high percentage are all short-term studies. We don't know how long it persists.
All right. Well, let's see here. I've got a couple more questions. Are you concerned at all about differential efficacy in the senior population with the J&J vaccine? Any concerns there at all?
I'm not. The hospitalization and the severe disease reduction is quite good. The confidence intervals are rather tight. All of these studies are technically, most of these studies are still only interim analyses, and they're still collecting data, so we don't even have the final reports on all of these. So, at this point, there are there's 2 great vaccines right now, and there's about to be a 3rd great vaccine, and I have not had any doses, and I'm still a month or 2 away from being eligible in my community because I'm not practicing pharmacy at a counter. I'm eager to get all these vulnerable people protected with a 3rd vaccine.
Now, one thing, John, that was part of the submission that Janssen made to the FDA was a supplemental, actually, that they submitted about the ability to transmit or asymptomatic infection. Could you comment briefly on that? Because that was not something that was really submitted with the other 2 vaccines, but Janssen did deal with that.
Moderna had a nasal swab study that suggested that there wasn't virus, or there was a reduction in the frequency of finding virus in the nose. Therefore, you should assume maybe that transmission is reduced. This is looking at people who had no symptoms. Their diary cards were plain, and yet seroconverted, indicating they had a silent infection, and that was more likely to happen with the vaccine group than the control group. So if you had fewer people symptomatic, sneezing, coughing, expelling, virus, then presumably you've reduced transmission. So there are indirect ways of trying to get at it. Transmission studies are very hard to do, but this is the best quality data yet, we think, and the biggest effect size yet. So.
And I also just want to come back to the issue of variants one more time, because that's a hot topic these days. The Anacin vaccine study did actually include some data on its effectiveness against, or its efficacy against variants, right?
That's right. So it had U.S. data, but it also had a lot of UK and South African and Latin American data. And sorry, not UK, Latin American data. And the vaccine was effective in each of those places in isolation, and the summary numbers represent all three. So a bunch of the disease it's preventing was this, nasty, quote unquote, South African variant, and that's, and to a certain extent, I mean, well, the mRNAs, because they were studied early, a few months ago, weren't tested in that way, and so there's laboratory data that the variants, there's a little bit of laboratory level reduction in immune response or immune neutralization with the mRNAs. So I think of these as three comparable products.
Yeah. And the Moderna product, I would just note that Moderna has announced that they're actually doing a separate study looking at the South African variant in particular. So there is more research going on with the variants. It's not as though it's all done. There's more happening, and I think
get used to it. You're going to be vaccinating for a while,
and that gets to the booster idea, John. What about boosters? I mean,
so let's differentiate a booster and a supplement. So how long? Let's call it classic virus. How long does immunity to classic virus persist, and do I need to get a booster, an extension?
Good
now.
Point.
Do I need a different vaccine, just subtly different? Next time you have a dose of, influenza vaccine has 4 different components. Polio vaccine has 3 different components. Do we need a supplement against the South African variant or a California variant or whatever? We don't know yet. We need to see if there's enough burden. But it could mean, we go to a bivalent product maybe eventually down the line. That's what's being, and people are pursuing that pretty vigorously. We just don't have the answers yet.
So one other question. We're getting close to the end of time. I'm going to try to get some more rapid fire questions here for you. These vaccines don't contain preservatives, and we've been given this directive from the CDC that we're not supposed to take the residual amount out of one vial and combine it with the residual amount out of another vial. Comment on that for us. Why? I mean,
it's an infection control issue.
Collecting it, why not?
Every manipulation has another chance for touch contamination. So, keep it simple.
Okay, keep it simple. And again, at touch contamination, there's no preservative. Sometimes we get distracted, things go on, we may not be able to draw. There's lots of reasons right now why we can't combine quantities from 2 different vaccine vials. So I know that there are pharmacists that feel strongly on the opposite side of that issue, but right now you're kind of out on thin ice on your own. If you do that, because that is not recommended at all from the CDC or the FDA. In fact, they clearly say not to do that. So if you're engaged in that activity, you have your right to professional judgment, but you're really skating on some pretty thin ice from a liability standpoint.
And are you in a lambda flow hood, or are you out in a convention center parking lot tent?
Yeah. So shake or not shake. So mRNA vaccines, no shaking. they need to be gently turned, as we're showing in the video. That's right. But we have a suspension with the adenovirus vaccine, with the Anacin vaccine. Are we shaking vigorously?
Shaking disrupts proteins. What happens when you shake insulin? You don't want to be shaking insulin, right? So, or not, it's the vigor. You don't want to froth. This is not cappuccino. Do not froth the vaccine.
So we're not making amoxicillin suspension here. We're going to just keep our nice, And we might even put our pinky up while we do it so that we kind of look stylish about it. So that's really important as well. Okay, good. Well, let's see. I'm going to take one more question here. I know what it is. What about administering this vaccine relevant to other vaccines? So I'm going to give you one specific scenario. I have a patient who's in her 3rd trimester of pregnancy and really needs to get a TDAP vaccine because we need to protect that baby against pertussis that's going to be born. But mom is at high risk of COVID. Do we give the COVID vaccine? Do we give the Tdap vaccine? You know, there's this 2-week interval thing. Do we have to wait the 2 weeks? What's the deal?
So this is a plug for the CDC Clinical Considerations website with all sorts of detail about all these crazy, you know, left-handed person goes across the international date line kind of situations. In this, normally, in the general rule is you separate them because you want to be able to attribute adverse events to one product or the other, and if you combine it, it becomes less clear. But in this case, you've got a patient who has 2 urgent needs, and I'd go ahead and combine them.
Yeah, okay. Well, we've got a ton of questions, but we need to move on. John, thanks for joining us today. Mitch, Dan, appreciate your insights and all that you're doing for our profession at this time. I want to bring on Mike Baxter from our, before I do that, I forgot. I want to get your opinions. Mike, you can come on, but I want to do a polling question real quick. We got to test our audience's opinions. Now, this question has no right answer. This is just about your opinion. We'd like to know for you, which is the most important for you in receiving a COVID-19 vaccine? What is for you the most important factor that you would consider when receiving a COVID-19 vaccine? So let's just get your opinions here. There's 4 options, and there's no right or wrong answer here. Just interested in your opinions about this. Let's keep voting. Great, getting the votes up there. Appreciate that. All right, okay, we'll close the poll and show the results. So about 1/3 of you say that prevention of any COVID infection is important, most important, and some of you said helping to achieve herd immunity is most important. And then about 1/4 said a reduction in severe infection, and 10% said reduction in hospitalization. So good, that's great. Appreciate your input on that. Mike, share with us the regulatory affairs info you have for us today.
Great info today. Everybody's wondering, where do we go, right? Where do we go for these meetings? So I'm just going to put that in the chat. If you can look at your chat function that you should have on your screen, I sent up the first one, and that one should have come across, and that one will give you the FDA meetings and where to go to sign up for that. And that's obviously tomorrow that we've been talking about today. Coming up next is that ACIP meeting. So I'm going to put that in the chat next, and how to register for that. And obviously you don't have to RSVP, you can just log on to that as well. But if you're looking for that information, we just sent that across as well. And then finally, next slide. Finally, you know, we've been getting a lot of questions and asking lately about what's going on in the regulatory and legislative environment as we're in with a new president and new administration. Obviously, a lot of people are being confirmed right now. Most recently, this week, we expect the hearings to end for the HHS Secretary Javier Becerra, and also the HHS team. And I'm going to include that on for our leg-reg update. So if you want to receive any of our updates, just log on there. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see where you can log in for the newsletter section and sign up for the legislative and regulatory update. And that's it for me.
All right, Mike, thanks so much for that great information. And just keep it on the same path with resources available for you. Our practice affairs team has created a new COVID-19 resource, Pharmacists referrals for monoclonal antibody treatment, assessing patients for potential COVID-19 treatment with monoclonal antibodies. And then we also have a reimbursement for administration of COVID-19 vaccines, what we know now. And so these two resources, we believe you'll find very, very helpful in the work that you do every day. So those are available to you. Please take advantage of them, download them, and share them. We think you'll find them very helpful. I also want to tell you that there is a new CE available, a 1-hour CE that is an overview of the Moderna vaccine, everything you need to know about that vaccine, including the MOA, the safety info, storage and handling, and how to overcome vaccine hesitancy with the Moderna vaccine. So another great opportunity for you to get the CE, and it's taught by Dan Slott, and I know you all, like I, love Dan's CEs. He does an excellent job with those. I also want to make mention to you all that we have APHA 2020 virtual coming up very quickly. I'm looking so forward to this meeting, folks, because I am looking forward to networking and connecting with pharmacists. I feel like we've been so isolated for so many months, and it's time that pharmacists got together, and we're going to have a real live opportunity to do that. So while the meeting is virtual, there are a ton of live activities going on during the meeting. It will be just as if you've gone to a convention center, except you can make your own cappuccino and enjoy it while you get to visit with pharmacists from all around the country who are interested in the things you're interested in. There is tremendous amounts of CE available, including over 10 hours of BCACP recertification credits. So if you're an ambulatory care pharmacy specialist, you really want to take advantage of that. That's going to be so important. The registration, early bird registration deadline is coming up this Sunday, and hey, it's very, very affordable. So I really want to encourage you, click on that link, get off of the fence, register for the meeting, and join us. I'll be happy to see you there. I get to listen to all of you during this webinar, but I don't get to see anybody. So it'd be great if we could see you at the meeting and actually participate in that way. Also want to encourage you, if you're a member of APHA, which most of you are, please engage with us on our Engage platform. This is a networking platform for APHA members to be able to share information with each other and ask questions and get share clinical tips and pearls. We have a community just for pharmacy's response to COVID-19, and we'll take some of the questions that you posed this week that we weren't able to address live on our show and try to address those in our pharmacy response to COVID-19 Engage community. So take advantage of that. Now, next week, same time, same place, we will have two very innovative pharmacists who are going to talk about their public health partnerships in practice and their collaborative efforts. And one of our pharmacists joining us is coming from a very rural community and talking about how she's been providing COVID vaccine. Another is a pharmacist that's coming from a suburban community, but has specifically been reaching into the African American community to try to improve immunization rates. These two pharmacists have a lot of information to share, and I'm excited for that. And the best part for you all is that you get CE for it. Next week will be CE. So don't forget to register, tell your friends about it. You'll want to be here and you won't want to miss it. Now, I want to thank you all for joining us this week, as you have for many of you for many, many weeks. We thank you for being here. We thank you for all that you're doing in the pandemic, and we wish you the very best. Have a great day, and God bless.